The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that time, Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be open. And his ears were open, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged them to tell no one. But the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Sri Lanka, my dear friends, our country, our nation, our land, is known in the world today for people who end their lives by themselves. It's one of the countries where there is an increasing number of men and women, especially young ones, who end their lives by themselves. Now, when you try to understand them, which is sometimes beyond our capacity, beyond our knowledge, the psychologists who have done research, they say the core problem, the bottom of their struggle is anxiety that is beyond their control. A pain or suffering or anxiousness that is too much for them. So the question is asked, why is it that people fall into the trap of severe anxiety? It can happen to you, it can happen to me. So it is good to know what is at the bottom of this problem of having strong anxiety issues. Underlying solution to this problem, they say, most of us always have the desire to think of our future. We all have to think, plan, and decide what to do and what not to do, what to say and what not to say, how to do this, how to do that. We all have to think of the future. But they say thinking of the future or planning for the future is a part of life, but never try to control your future. The more you try to control, the less control you have. The less control you try to have on your own future or your life, better it is for all of us. When you read the three texts today, my dear friends, especially the first reading taken from the book of Prophet Isaiah, it tells us as to how, if you are a man or woman of faith, how your faith should inspire you to overcome the problem of anxiety and hopelessness. The first reading today, taken from the book of Prophet Isaiah, was written during the time of Babylonian exile for the people of Israel. That's a time where they had lost everything. They have no right to their own lands. They had no freedom. They were people who had to live under the leadership of a tyrant who was trying to destroy them, who had made them become their slaves. And it was a time of complete hopelessness. But then Isaiah, being a man of God, looks at this problem or looks at this situation pretty differently. And you can see that At a time where there was no way for them to come into a time of freedom, he says, behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you. Now, when he said this, people thought he was out of his mind. People thought, this man is not normal. How can this be? But then his imagination, his faith was so strong, in spite of what was happening in real life, in a day-to-day situation, he had this hope that God will come and save them. And now you can see that his hope was so full of life that when he wrote this, he says, he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. So you can see that he expresses the hope that he had. The fullness of his hopefulness was so strong as he said, yes, we are now slaves. Yes, we have messed ourselves. Yes, we have no hope. But it is going to be different. God will save us. Sometimes, my dear friends, it happens to us in our individual lives as well. We come into these moments of life, or periods of life, or phases in our journey on this earth where we can be completely consumed by hopelessness because of something that has happened, something that is not happening, or someone who is doing this, that, or the other. But always remember, my dear friends, it's one experience for us to give in to hopelessness, but also have the sense of hopefulness, especially when you believe in a higher power. Now, that is why Albert Einstein, a great thinker of the 20th century, he says something beautiful about when it comes to dealing with any problem in life. He says solutions to problems can never be found at the level that they were created. Solutions to problems can never be found at the level they were created. In other words, he says, look at a situation, look at your problem from a different realm, from a different angle, from a different way. And here, Isaiah's eyes were eyes of faith. God will save us. Things will change. Have hope, because we are not the ones who are in control. So whether it is in our individual life or family life or the life of this nation, we always have to have hope, because that's part and parcel of being a man or woman of faith. Looking at life not at the level the problems were created, as Einstein says, at a different level. Now, when you come to the second reading today from the letter of St. James, again, it was a different context, so many centuries after the time of Isaiah, but it was a time where the Christian community, as they were emerging, as they were growing, were beset with problem of racism. That was one main problem. The other one was the difference between the rich and the poor. The communities had a problem where the rich were getting more attention, more treatment, and the poor were less important in the Christian community. So what the author says here is that, let us remember, when we think of life, your money, your wealth, your education, or your external capacities don't mean anything. Because in the eyes of God, we all are equal. We are all the same. Sometimes we as human beings, we tend to think when you are rich, when you are powerful, that your life is much better than everyone else's. Yes, of course, at certain levels. But then that doesn't mean that you as an individual has to be hopeless in life. That is why, my dear friends, when it comes to thinking of our own lives, let us not think of the future just on what is right there, or what we have, or what we own. Think of life at a different angle, from a deeper perspective, having God in your journey. Because the way of the world is to give us all kinds of measuring rods, where we tend to take them and to destroy our lives. The gospel again is taken from the Gospel of Mark, which we will read in the coming few weeks. And the context of the reading is that Jesus had gone to the region of Decapolis, which means there were 10 cities that were on the eastern front of the Roman Empire. So that means this area was called Rome within the area of Israel, or it was like a mini Rome. And Jesus had gone there to meet and deal with people who were there, to preach to them. And there comes this man with a hearing impediment, deaf and a dumb man. Now it is interesting here that in this context of social and political life, there was more of opposition to anyone doing anything in that region, especially performing miracles, talking about God, bringing people together. It was not allowed. But this man who was so hopeless in that sense of living in the area of Decapolis, what happens to him is, though it is a context of hopelessness, few of his friends took him to Jesus. So the author says he never went to Jesus, but few people around him brought him to Jesus, and that was the turning point in his life. So in a way, when you think in terms of a man who was completely hopeless, hope came to him because of few people who were there with him. In your life and in my life also, my dear friends, life can take us to times of realms that are very difficult to deal with, complete hopelessness. But then sometimes in the design of God, things change completely. Now when I say this, I remember few months ago meeting with a man who was almost 85, 86 years old, done well with his life, and he wanted to talk to me about his own life. He said, "Father, before I pass away from this life, I want you to know that I was someone who was born in a very ordinary family. My father died when I was very young, and we were three brothers, three sons. And our mother was struggling so much to help us in this life. She educated us, gave us everything, but life was very difficult." So he said, now this is going back to 1960s, 70s. He said, "I was struggling and I was completely hopeless." And then he said, one day, when he was working in an office as an ordinary clerk, someone who came into his office wanted some document. So he said, I helped that man to get whatever that was. It was a simple act of helping someone who came to my office as a customer. So he said, I did that. And that person who came in was interested in listening to my story, and he invited me for tea and we discussed, and then he gave me this break in his company and told me, come and work for me. And then he sent him to UK those days. And then, of course, he said, I went to UK, and again, life was difficult, but I started struggling. Again, I came into this period of hopelessness. Then he said, in my hopelessness, not knowing how to go ahead and live in that country without much money and resources, he said, again, when I was going into a coffee shop, there was another senior gentleman who came, and I helped him to open the door. So he was impressed with this young man doing this, and he called him and gave him very serious business deals for this man to come back to Sri Lanka and to start. So he said, my life was completely changed because of two strangers who came into my life without my knowing anything what was going to happen. First, the chance to go to UK, and when I was there, to come and start a business here and to be successful. So therefore, my dear friends, we all have to remember that letting ourselves go into hopelessness is very easy, because many do allow themselves to go into that period of darkness or that experience of hopelessness. But again, being a man of God or man of faith or woman of faith, we always have to remember there is always the possibility of hope and change in life. As I mentioned, my dear friends, it is one thing to think of the future and plan for the future, but never try to control your future, because that's what destroys our capacity to be hopeful. Learn to let go, because we all have to let go of our own lives. We do not know what happens tomorrow. We do not know what happens to our businesses, our employment, or whatever. Anything can happen at any time. But let us remember, let us always live having hope for the future, but never trying to control it. The hand of control is with someone else. That is why we believe in a God who knows all of us, our future, and what happens to us and what will not happen to us.